Howdy y'all, this is AR Cavally. Welcome back to my channel. And since I've got the camera set up for some reviewing type stuff, I figured I'd throw some other things in there while I've got all the cameras pointed. I have recently kind of gotten into the OSR, all right? The old school Renaissance or revival, whatever you call it. Um, Now I'm not really big on telling people how they should play. I certainly have my preferred styles, and I think there's a lot of fighting and drama that aren't really necessary. But I've recently got these white box and delving deeper and these type of clones of the original game that get back to playing it how simply it it was originally played. I started playing, I think, BX. My cousin Tammy, she was my first GM, and I actually talked to her about it. She still has that book that we played with back on our the family trip back in 83, 82, whenever it was. Um, so she was the first one who got me into it, and I remember that feeling of just exploring and looking at things. Now I'm a game wonk. I'm a rules wonk. I love rules that that are smooth, that get things done. But there's really something about I guess what some people might call the free Kriegspiel, right, where you just describe what you're doing and you have someone tell you whether it works or not. I remember going through those rooms in the dungeon, and there was not really like a search for traps or search for hidden doors thing. She would describe what I saw, and then I would pick I would say, oh, you said there's a crack around that statue's head. Okay, well, I'm going to look around that. Right, and that is kind of the essence of the the old school thought. Right. Now, there's a lot of I like ascending armor class. I just think it makes more sense. And again, I'm not trying to get into anybody's, into anybody's uh fight or anything because I'm not interested in it. But there is something about returning to some of the very basic ideas. Now, this is not going to be a review on White Box or Delving Deeper. As much as I really like those, and I really like this White Box. I like the art and I like the game and everything. This is really a good product. I like it a lot, and the it goes great with that Delving Deeper supplement because it has a lot of the exploration stuff that the White Box little game, whatever, it left out. But I'm really here, though. This review is not anything about those, but about a different OSR game that I have had for a long time. I think, well, according to these, um, the prints, and I think I got these either a year or the year after they came out, since so it's around 2009 or something. Um, Ancient Odysseys, Treasure Awaits, and More Treasure Awaits by Precis Intermdia Games. Back when I first came across it, PIG was politically incorrect games, so they changed the name. Brett Bernstein's the guy who runs PIG Games, and I have a lot of those games. I like a lot of their product, and they have a lot of old games on there. I'd suggest go and check them out. But in particular, I'm going to go over these games here. I've had them for a long time. I've played them with my children, and they're not D20 based. They're a single D6 game, but it is, I think, very much at least adjacent to the OSR type movement because it is very simple, it's very fast, um, but there was always something that kind of nagged at the back of my head, that I had a problem with it. It took me a while to figure out what it was, and I'll get through it. I'll talk about that when I do the review, go through the book, which is right now. All right, so these books, these are the pocket edition. The original version, I think, came in like a box that kind of looked like the D&D. It was three thin pamphlet type books, like full sized ones, not this size, more like the red book than the little brown books. Which I had some of those somewhere and I lost them, and that makes me very sad. But this is the pocket edition, and they're great. They come in a great size. The thing that makes this very, very quick is that when you're making your characters, is that there's hardly any choices. Everything you roll. Some people won't like that, but when you're making a character, you basically have two choices. You pick what class of character you want, and this is well, it calls them occupations. It doesn't have levels. It is a skill based game, but it's all D6. All right, so you have your adventuring races, your abilities, and it only has three: fitness, awareness, and reasoning. It has three vocations: rogues, warriors, and wizards. That's to start with. The second book introduces the pathfinder and the cleric. I think maybe one other. I can't. Well, we will look. And then you have pursuits. All right, each pursuit is a skill level, and it adds to your roll. The basic skill process is 1d6 plus your attribute, and your flat attribute, not a bonus, just your attribute, because your attribute is 1 to 5, usually not 5, usually 2 or 3, plus your skill level, which is going to be 1 to 3, versus a target number of 7 is usual target number, or versus the opposing stats of the character that you're hitting or trying to cast a spell or whatever. So if you're trying to hit somebody, your target number is going to be equal to 3 plus their fitness rating plus their appropriate combat skill. And then you're going to have to get that or over, and then you hit. All right, so it's very quick. You roll, there's an array. You roll 1d6, it tells you what your stats are. You get to choose 4 of these skills here, and then you roll for your skill level, 1, 2, or 3. And then you pick out of a pretty short list of weapons. You roll for armor, and then if you're a wizard or a cleric, and if we're looking at the other book, then you pick spells. The fantasy races, they work the same as a lot. They get a bonus to a stat and then a penalty to another one, and some of them will get 1 point in a skill. And then there's some names, and that is character creation. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through that real quick, just to show you how easy and how fast it is to make those characters. All right, so we're going to start out. We're going to say that we're a warrior. Actually, we'll just go ahead and random it all up. All right, so create an adventurer. Our first is to select, or you can select, but we'll go ahead and make it random. All right, so we'll roll 5, a dwarf. And what is he? He's a warrior, dwarf warrior. Very good. It's a very proper vocation for a dwarf. And then his abilities. He's a warrior. I'm going to roll die 6, 4. So 3, 4, and 1. Now, fitness is like for your melee, and awareness is for missile weapon and other stuff. That's your perception and your dexterity kind of all rolled into one. Your awareness, that's what's used for that. So in this case, if you take a look at the arrays, you'll see that they're varied, right? There's one result there in the middle where you can get a 5 for a warrior's fitness, but then his awareness and reasoning are way low. They generally tend to add up to 8. Not all of them do. They don't all add up to 8, but some do. All right, now he's a dwarf, so dwarves receive a penalty of -1 to reasoning, but can't if it's greater than 1. His is not, so that does not apply. All right, step 5, or next step 4, pursuits. We're going to select on our warrior, we're going to select axe fighting. And we're just going to go ahead and select it and then immediately roll. Axe fighting is 4, so that's going to be it's going to give him an axe fighting of 2. Get these dice, other dice out of the way here. And let's see, let's have battleware. Okay, that's not the best. Battleware is 1. A battleware is a skill that basically if you wear heavy armor, it comes with penalties, and your battleware level will subtract that, or will apply against that. So if you have a -1 and you have a 1 battleware, like I unfortunately have, then that's then it's not going to affect you. And let's see, of course he's a dwarf, so he needs a proper axe fighting skill. So 5, that gives us a 2. But dwarves receive a bonus +1 axe fighting if rating is less than 3. So I'm going to go ahead and bring axe fighting up to 3. And let's see, what else is a good one? We'll go ahead and do athletics. Oh, that's good. Athletics is 3. That's what you use to like get out of traps and things like that. And should do some archery or melee. Let's go ahead and do archery. We'll use some on that big dwarven crossbow. All right, archery 2. And let's see what his armor is. I select the armor first in case, the 6. Plate mail. Well, he's got plate. So he's got plate, and that gives him armor 4. Which normally I'd be a little more happier about it, but his battleware is not very great. So we'll give him that and then a weapon of a battle axe, since he doesn't have a shield. All right, and we'll pick a dwarven name. Let's see. Kinflail? Sure, why not? All right, so Kinflail, the dwarf warrior, He's selected his weapon. He's got his armor. That's his list for being a warrior. And then he picks a piece of gear, either a torch, rope, or satchel, or a grimoire. I guess we'll go for rope. Why not? All right, and then he's done. That's it. All right. So very quick to make a group. Now the armor. So that part here, the armor comes with penalties, and like I said, the battle wear reduces those penalties. So if he keeps his plate mail, he's going to have some penalties with it. All right, so here's a good example of it, and then playing the game. Now, this game is really, I won't say designed necessarily, but to be solo, but it was designed in the way that its turns work that you don't necessarily need a GM. Okay, it all happens the same way. And it has a lot of generation tables in it for creating dungeons. Now it comes with a dungeon as well, kind of like a choose your own adventure almost kind of thing, where everything's labeled. You decide, if you go in, what kind of trap is there, and you look up the traps. And that's like a sample dungeon that comes in the game. All right, and everything is based on crossing thresholds when you enter a new room and dealing with what's inside. There's traps, there's monsters that you have to decide whether, if you're playing just the basic way where you walk in, you have to decide if someone in your group is going to try to forage for the trap to try to spot it, and then if someone's going to try to disarm it. And if you do that, then you end up having a penalty for initiative and reaction if there turns out to be a monster or a foe in that room, because you were searching around and woke them up instead of paying attention to see if someone was getting ready to come attack you. The group is divided into closest and farthest, and some of that comes into effect when you're dealing with traps. It'll say affects the farthest group members. And that's kind of a marching order thing. Instead of using a full-on map with grids and things like that, Treasure Awaits, or Ancient Odysseys, uses like this little battle map, a positional map. Your group is either the farthest or the closest. You can have someone who's sneaking, and if they're sneaking, then you put them on there to indicate that. And then this is the enemy, and if you manage to sneak across, you mark your guys behind. I think technically the way it's written is half of the party is supposed to be farthest and half is supposed to be closest. But I usually will let, if you have 3 people or 4 people in the group and 3 of them want to use their sword and shield, and you only have one who's really a missile user, then I allow 3 closest and 1 farthest. Now, whereas before I described like the combat, the enemy, to hit the enemy, you roll your fitness and skill plus 1d6 versus 3 plus their fitness and skill level. And if you get it or higher, then you've struck and you've done the damage. All right. The damage is either 1 point or 2 point, depending basically on whether or not it's a one-handed or two-handed weapon. And your foes have a number of hits. Everybody has a number of hits. You can see here, there's injury. Once you've taken your 4th and 5th hit, then you start getting penalties for being injured. All right, and it sounds like it's a lot, but it really isn't. There are ranged attacks are a little different. Instead of there's a set difficulty level which can be modified by things like distance and fog, things like that, and that's what you need to hit the enemy. And here are some other options that you can do: aim, block, which you can fight defensively or fight offensively. You can try to escape, sneak, loot. The looting is it's a little ridiculous for me, because it's you're like looting sometimes something big from somebody in the middle of a fight, and I'm like, not that. And then you also have your casting spells. All right, when you cast a spell, it's a skill roll, and if you fail, it's not slots. If you fail, then you end up taking some damage, possibly. There's a pretty slick, the way that everything in the room follows a kind of a very similar outline. You have, like, if you're looking at traps, Shroud is 8. That's the difficulty to find it. That's the difficulty to disarm it. That's the difficulty to avoid it. And that's the damage. And so each thing is listed like that, just as a couple numbers. Same with traps, poisons, same thing. A list of pretty familiar skills, spells, and they are based on the level of your spellcasting skill. If you have a spellcasting skill of 1, then you can only cast first level spells, and on to 2, and vice versa. Very quick, to the point. Not a lot of extra description about what's going on there. There's potions. Here are reaction and attitude, morale tables, how many creatures. And so for this little book, there's a lot of compact and useful information. And at the end of the game, it has this kind of it's an interesting. It does a balance between how well you did versus how many things you screwed up, and then you kind of tally those up, and that determines the spell points that you, or the experience points that you get. So it's kind of interesting, pretty interesting. All right, now that's book 1. That basically covers all of the skills, the combat. The combat it's very easy. There's no opposed rolls, but there is armor. So if we go back to our sheet that talked about that we had some plate armor. Plate armor has an armor value of 4. That means that for every point of damage that he gets hit, he rolls 1d6 to make an armor save against that point of damage. Now again, most damage is just 1. But if you have a two-handed weapon, like his crossbow does 2 points, and a battle axe does 2 points. So in a situation like that, he's going to take 2 points of damage, and each one of these die that doing the armor check that rolls equal to or under the armor value, in this case it's 4, is going to stop it. All right, so he rolled a 3, it stops that, but the second point would have gotten through, causing 1 hit. It's really easy to keep track of. It describes in here that leathers don't hardly stop anything. They only have an armor value of 1. And so even when things are armored, the armor value is uh, low enough that it's not going to turn into a tank battle. Like even right there, he's got plate mail. He's only stopping on a 1 through 4, so he can still take damage. It can still help him, but it's not going to make the game necessarily. It's not going to make a battle necessarily drag on longer than it needs to. And I like that. I like that system pretty well. In fact, this whole game is kind of a stripped down version of their genre diversion, Brett slash PIG games. Genre diversion games, they are, it's kind of a universal system, but split between some pretty cool campaigns. And it's a 2d6 system like this, but it has traits and some extra things. They made one that is a like a universal game without this genre diversions 3, I think is what it's called, and it's designed to take care of any kind, but they have genres or they have settings that they have. There's a western, and there is a space one called Star Nova, and that one's pretty good. It's kind of a typical space opera kind of thing. Um, and there's kind of a Call of Cthulhu one. And this is kind of a stripped down version of that, where it doesn't have as many stats and it doesn't have as many skills. And the damage system is similar, but again, truncated. All right, so like I said, this was originally in a box and it came in different in books. Book 2 is the dungeon. And the way the dungeon is set up, and it's great for solo play because, like I mentioned before, it's like a game. It's like those old game books. You figure out which way you're going to go, and as you are playing solo or without a GM, you're deciding, am I going to stop and look for traps? Am I going to try to find the traps, or am I going to um, get ready to attack a monster? In which case, I might get hit by the trap if I don't do that. Now, the marching order and the set of actions, playing that way is fairly strict. You have to do this, you have to do this, and you have to do this. Well, I say have to, but it's set up to be done that way. Whereas if you have a GM, if you have somebody who's running the game, then you have some more options. You have some more leeway in that, because you have someone who can, uh, react to what's being described. I want to do this instead of just crossing the threshold, look for traps, look for monster, whatever. It gives them a little more ability to interact. But this map, or this dungeon in here, has locations, has the bad guys, and so it's really pretty cool. I really like this game. Like I said, I've had it for a long time. I've played it with my kids. I've played it solo. It's almost designed to play solo. Um, I do have 2 house rules though that I really had to put in play. One was not so important. That leathers doesn't do a lot of armor hits, and they say it's not very effective, and so it only works against like blunt weapons, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense. But to show that it is inferior, say to like brigandine, to give it a difference, I play that my house rule is that the leather can only ever stop 1 point, whereas normally armor will get an armor roll against every point that comes in. Leather armor can only ever stop 1 point, whereas brigandine, even though it has a low armor save, it has the chance of stopping every point that comes in. But the other thing that, and it actually kind of took me a little while to figure out why things didn't seem to always be as fun, because as written, everything has 5 hits. If you're fighting with a sword and a shield, you're only doing 1 hit at a time. And so you could be fighting the weakest, tiniest little monster goblin baby, and you have to hit them 6 times. They have 5 injury points, and then after they get their 6th, then they're dead. And that really turns everything into a slog. Not only does it do that, but it actually makes it a little tougher on the PCs, because they are going to get more rolls against them, because these creatures hang in there, because you've got to hit them 6 times before the fight's over, assuming there's, they don't run away for morale reasons or whatever. And I realized that was really kind of dragging the combats down, because it's really such a simple system, but then it just kept going on and on and on, because the baby rat has as many hit points, easier to hit, no armor or whatever, but he has as many hits as a dragon. And so when I came up with the rule that I use now, I let the players keep their 5 hits, because they're kind of heroic and going in the dungeon and everything, and it's still still dangerous. You only have those 5 hits, but instead I give them hits equal to their fitness. And so if you're fighting teeny tiny goblins or whatever, then they don't have 5 hits. They've only got 2 or 3. If their size, because there's a size listing for the monsters, if their size is small, then I subtract 1 health, with a 1 minimum, of course. And if they're large, I add 1 hit. And if they're giant, or whatever the other one is, super large, then I add 2. That way, it's based off of their fitness, but if they're bigger or smaller, they have fewer hits. And I found that really sped things up, that really streamlined things, and it just makes sense in my GM brain. But there's uh, the dungeon, and it's cool. At the end, there's actually the drawing of the dungeon, and it's mostly just going through and fighting goblins. You don't get to see that dungeon map, though. What you have are the choices, which way you're going to go, 1 or 2, 3 or 4. So that part's pretty good. The whole book is taken up with that adventure, basically. All right, here are some optional rules, and that rule I was just talking about is similar to the minion rule, which is basically if they're the mooks, if they're the the schlubs, then they get half of the hits. And here are some other options that you can do, like a lucky 6 and whatnot. An exploit. I do kind of like the exploit. If you get 3 or more, what it calls overkill, 3 or more than what you need, then you get to double damage. And here's some good advice on directing the game. And then we have our dungeon generator for on-the-fly dungeons. Or if you wanted to make it, the night before or whatever. But you have your different chambers, different you roll for monsters and traps and whatnot. You know what a dungeon generator is. But for a small book, it's pretty good. It is pretty good. It has a lot of options. And here's the I like that they use like an odd and even die, and then 2 1d6 columns. instead of 2d6 for some things. It's because it gives you a more even number distribution. Random traps, random monsters. This one is definitely for the dungeons, right? It's all about finding the traps. It's all about finding the treasure. This particular game has no setting, at least in the first book. There's no setting. It's just you and your GM, or you and your group, decide where you're trotting off to, where you're from. Some magic items. Here's the back has good tables. It's a good place to have those things where you can just look everything up. And then there's our little combat. Now that was book 1. And book 2 basically set up the same way, except it adds another race, the Draconians, and it adds clerics and pathfinders. So clerics and rangers in there. It has the updated. So for the character creation, you don't have to look at both books. It's all in the second book. It's updated with the new careers, but it still has the old ones in it, so you can just use the single book. So same thing: roll for class, roll for career, roll for race. Pick some skills, roll for those levels. You can have an animal companion if you are a pathfinder. And that stuff's the same, but there are some more ways to play. This one deals with steeds and overland travel. This is kind of its big thing. You see there, like in a forest, and it designs the forests and stuff pretty much just like dungeons, kind of like the old 8-bit or 16-bit dungeon video games, where it's still a dungeon. They just look like forest walls, or the walls just look like forests and stuff. But some more stuff on allies, other ways to end the game, more adventures, and this is talking about adding more creatures and constructing a landscape instead of a dungeon. It basically is the same thing, just different window dressing, but it does add some pretty good value. The traps outside, the traps in there are outside traps. They're pits and boar traps and things like that. And then it also has this is a pretty good section too. Definitely a good addition. It has information on towns, bartering. In fact, it does add, I think, 3 more skills, one of them being bartering. So it adds bartering, the towns. It has some town intrigues, how the towns work, getting some hirelings. Hirelings were definitely always something important to the tromping down the original dungeons. Some extinguished tables, some more tables, some more equipment to kind of add to, and not so much that it overwhelms anything that was in the original book, but it's definitely a good level of additional traps and creatures, and how to make outdoor mazes, basically how to have outdoor adventures. And this book does add a very, very sparsely detailed campaign setting. There's the human kingdoms and the hoblings, little map, the dwarvens, the dwarven kingdoms, the orc kingdoms, the white kingdoms. And it's basically just a couple paragraphs for each. And this one also has has a dungeon in it. So even if you just do a couple of them, I don't know that they ever came out with any more like pre-made dungeons like this, where the numbers match with certain traps, and you can or encounters, and you can just go through by yourself like a game book. I don't know that they ever did that. So here's a little bit of what I was talking about here. If you're going to if say our little say our axe fighter here is going to attack, and I'm not going to run through a whole combat, but um, if he were attack, he would take 3. If you were attack with his axe, 3 plus 3, 6, plus 1 die 6. And say he was attacking one of these Shrike Raiders, his target number would start at 3. That's just the default for melee. Add the enemy fitness, and then the enemy skill that he's using. In this case, melee would be a weapon if he had, mace or something. So he would have a 1, 2, 3, 4 plus the base 3, so he'd need a 7 or higher. This guy has a 6 with his axe, so he's pretty much going to hit every time. Right, so he hits, and using it as raw, I'd have to hit him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have to do that like 5 more times. Now he has an armor of 1, so we'll use my way so that he is a normal size with 2, so he's got 2 health. My battle axe does 2 because it's a larger 2-handed weapon. Oops, actually, let me take that back. I need to double check something. I don't know that a dwarf, I know it's going to seem kind of counterintuitive maybe, but I don't think that a dwarf's okay, they're just the hobbits. I was gonna say I was there are some weapon restrictions based on the shorter guys, but that's apparently just for the hoblings. But one thing I did forget is that the dwarves, they also get a bonus. They get a +1 to their armor rating if it's less than 5. All right, the elves, they have a penalty to that, but they all, they kind of balance out. The elves have a penalty to their armor to represent their, more delicate constitutions. Or dwarves get a bonus. So his armor is actually 5, which is as high as it can go. That's as high as it can go. But this guy has an armor of 1, so if he took 2 strike or 2 points of damage from my battle axe. All right, neither one of those is a 1, so both points get through, and he would take 2 hits. And there's a picture of what the map looks like. And a updated, but largely the same set of charts at the back. So that's it. Ancient Odysseys by PIG Games, Precis Intermdia. One of my favorite. One of my favorite OSR games, if you will. But it's very simple. It's very fun, especially. I have more fun now that I have reduced the hits of the bad guys, or not because they're not all reduced. Some go up actually, but modified the hits of the bad guys, so it's not quite as much of a slugfest. But it's still there. PIG Games is still there. I'll put links down in the bottom. But this is one of my favorite games, and I love the fact that it's like pocket size. I just like being able to hold them down. I hold them like that. And if you are interested in reviews about the white box and the delving deeper, they're excellent books. But there are a lot of people who have already, who are a lot more familiar with the OSR type games and stuff. I've made characters and played some and everything, and I love them. But there are people who are more knowledgeable about those systems. But this one right here, it's old but it's still out there, and I would suggest picking it up. It's a fun game, and it is simple enough to play with kids, and yet there's enough meat on the bones to play with more veteran players. But anyway, thanks for coming along. I hope that was interesting, if not useful. and uh, we'll see you next time. Happy gaming.